Serafina Voss had never once asked the world to notice her. She woke before sunrise every morning, walked through the stone corridors of the Silver Crescent Pack's stronghold, and spent her days in the healing wards, mixing herbs and tending to sick wolves. Her hands were rough, her dress was plain, she had no family name, no rank, and no one to speak on her behalf. She had been raised by the Pack as a ward, a girl taken in, out of obligation, not out of love. Most of the Pack barely knew her name. That changed on the night of the marking. It was the most important evening in the Silver Crescent calendar. Every year, the alpha males of the Pack would gather in the grand ceremonial hall to formally recognize their fated mates before the Pack Council. Fires burned in iron brackets along the stone walls. Wolves in fine clothing stood shoulder to shoulder, their voices low and respectful. The air smelled of candle smoke and pine. Serafina had not intended to attend. She had been passing through the corridor outside when the door swung open, and the crowd pulled her in without thinking. She stood at the far edge of the room, half hidden behind a stone pillar, watching quietly. Then it happened. A scent reached her across the crowded hall. Warm and deep, like earth after rain. Her breath caught, her chest tightened. Every nerve in her body went still, the way a forest goes still, just before lightning strikes. She knew, without knowing how she knew, that her fated mate was in this room. Her eyes found him instantly. Alpha Kalen Dusk stood in the center of the hall. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with gray eyes, and the kind of presence that made everyone in a room aware of exactly where he was standing. He had led the Silver Crescent Pack for 4 years, and in those 4 years, the Pack had grown stronger, richer, and more feared by their enemies. He was everything the Pack admired. His gray eyes met hers. For one long moment, neither of them moved. The bond between fated mates was unmistakable, a pull so certain it felt like gravity. Serafina felt it, and from the way his jaw tightened, she could see that he felt it too. He walked toward her slowly. The crowd parted without being asked. The entire hall went quiet. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. He looked her over, not with warmth, not with curiosity, but with the calm, calculating gaze of a man running numbers in his head, and not liking the answer. His eyes moved from her worn shoes to her plain dress, to her calloused hands to her face. Then he turned to face the room. His voice was clear and steady. I, Alpha Kalen Dusk, reject you, Serafina Voss, as my fated mate. You are unworthy of the Silver Crescent title. I choose my own destiny. The words were ancient and binding. In the tradition of the wolf packs, a spoken rejection before the council was final. It could not be taken back. Serafina did not cry. She did not speak. She simply looked at him for one more second, just long enough for him to see that her eyes were dry, and then she nodded once and walked out of the hall. Nobody followed her. For 3 days, no one saw her. The Pack moved on quickly, the way packs always do after an uncomfortable moment. Kalen announced his chosen mate the very next morning, Lady Isolde Merath, the polished and politically powerful daughter of a neighboring alpha. The match made perfect strategic sense. Isolde was beautiful, well-connected, and exactly the kind of woman people expected to stand beside an alpha like Kalen. The Pack approved. Life continued. In the healing wards, the other healers noticed something strange. The medicinal herbs Serafina had been tending, a row of plants that had been slowly dying for months, despite everyone's best efforts, began to bloom overnight. Not 1 or 2 of them. All of them. Every single plant in the ward burst into full, healthy life, as if they had simply been waiting for permission. Old Marin, the head healer, walked the rows early on the 2nd morning and went very still. She had been a healer for 40 years. She had never seen anything like it. On the 4th day, Serafina came back. She walked through the front gate of the stronghold at dawn, and the 2 guards posted there stepped aside without being asked. Neither of them could explain afterward why they had done so. Something in the way she carried herself had simply made it feel like the right thing to do. She looked the same plain dress, same brown hair, but something about her was different, in a way that was hard to name. There was a stillness to her now, a depth, like a river that used to look shallow, and had revealed itself to be something else entirely. Her eyes, which had always been a flat, ordinary brown, now carried faint rings of silver at the edges. Marin pulled her aside before anyone else could speak to her. "What happened to you out there?" the old healer asked quietly. Serafina considered the question for a moment, as if she was choosing her words carefully. "I went to the old forest," she said, "and something there woke up." Marin had read about it once, in a text so old that the pages had gone brown at the edges and the ink had faded to near nothing. She had read it as history, as a story about something that had happened a very long time ago and would never happen again. A Luna Primalis. The term predated the modern pack system by centuries. A Luna Primalis was not simply an alpha's mate. She was something else entirely, a woman whose power did not come from her bond to a male wolf, but from the land itself, from the old bloodlines, and from something deeper that most wolves had forgotten even existed. They arose once every few hundred years, drawn into the world at moments when something needed to be set right. They could not be rejected without consequence. Not because of any law, not because of any punishment system or council ruling, but because of something woven into the fabric of the world itself, something that did not ask for permission and did not negotiate. When Kalen had rejected Serafina, he had not simply wounded a woman. He had broken something older than his pack, older than his title, older than anything he had ever held in his hands. And the world had noticed. Marin begged Serafina to leave. To go somewhere safe before what was coming became impossible to stop. Serafina listened to every word the old healer said. She sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, and she listened. Then she shook her head. "I heard something in the forest," she said simply. A voice older than words. "It told me to stay. It told me I have work to do." Marin looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. What followed was not a single dramatic event. It was quieter than that, and somehow more powerful because of it. The Silver Crescent territory began to change. Fields that had not produced a good harvest in a decade suddenly grew thick with crops. A river at the eastern edge of the territory that had been running dry for 3 years filled with clean, fast-moving water overnight. Wolves in the pack who had been suffering from an illness that no healer could identify began to recover, slowly at first, then steadily. The ones who recovered were the ones who had been kind to Serafina over the years, the ones who had said good morning to her in the corridor, the ones who had left extra food outside the healing ward during difficult winters, the ones who had remembered her name. The ones who had not been kind found that their recovery came more slowly. Serafina did not announce herself. She did not stand in the great hall and declare what she was. She simply moved through the territory doing what she had always done, caring for the sick, tending to the land, sitting with the children in the healing ward. But wherever she went, something settled, something healed. Word spread to neighboring packs within 2 weeks. Within a month, it had reached the human towns on the border of pack territory. Within 6 weeks, a formal report sat on the desk of the Lycan Royal Council, the governing body that oversaw all wolf packs across the continent. The report had been filed by 3 different sources, none of whom knew each other. A royal envoy arrived at the Silver Crescent stronghold on a Tuesday morning. Kalen met them at the gate with his usual calm confidence. He listened to their questions with a steady expression. Then he told them, politely and firmly, that Serafina was no one, a ward, a rejected mate, a mistake that the pack had already moved past. The lead envoy, a small, quiet woman, with sharp eyes and silver rings on every finger, looked at him for a moment without speaking. "Alpha Dusk," she said at last, "do you know what a Luna Primalis is?" The color left Kalen's face. The Lycan Royal Council did not send a second message. They sent a summons, formal, sealed in the royal emblem, addressed not to Kalen, but to Serafina. She was to come to the royal seat, not as a visitor, not as a witness, as someone whose presence had been formally requested and whose safety was now under the kingdom's protection. She was escorted not by Silver Crescent guards, but by 6 of the kingdom's own royal wolves, an honor reserved for heads of state and for figures the kingdom considered sacred. The night before she left, Kalen came to her. He did not come with the calm authority he wore in public. He came alone, quietly, to the door of the healing ward where Serafina was finishing her last preparations. He stood in the doorway and looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked like a man who understood the weight of what he had done. He asked her, carefully and without quite begging, whether she might consider staying. Serafina set down the small bundle she had been folding. She turned and looked at him the way she had looked at him in the ceremonial hall, steady, dry-eyed, and completely clear. "You made your choice, Alpha Dusk," she said quietly. "The kingdom is making theirs." She picked up her bundle and walked past him without looking back. What followed happened fast. The Royal Council reviewed the rejection in formal session and ruled that refusing a Luna Primalis constituted an act of territorial negligence, a failure to protect a sacred element of the Lycan Kingdom. The Silver Crescent Pack's royal charter was suspended, pending a full review of Kaelin's leadership decisions. Within the pack, the mood began to shift. The wolves who had cheered Kaelin's choice started to feel the change in the land, or rather, they started to feel its absence. The healing that had been spreading through the territory began to slow at the edges, particularly around the stronghold itself, particularly close to Kaelin. Some of the most loyal wolves in the pack quietly traveled to the royal seat, not to betray their alpha, but because the pull of a Luna Primalis is older than pack loyalty, and they felt it in their bones without fully understanding why. Lady Isolde came to Kaelin 2 days after the council's ruling. She was not cruel about it. She was very composed, which in some ways was worse. She sat across from him in his private study and told him clearly that she was withdrawing from the betrothal agreement. "I will not stand beside a man the kingdom is turning against," she said, "and I will not align myself with someone foolish enough to reject the moon herself." She left that same afternoon. Kaelin sat alone in his study for a long time after she was gone. He did not rage. He did not call for his counsel. He simply sat in the chair behind his desk and looked at the wall, and in the silence of that room, he began to understand something that no one had been able to teach him before. Not because the lesson had never been offered, but because he had never been in a position where he had no choice but to receive it. Power is not the same thing as worth. Status is not the same thing as value. And the most costly mistakes in life are not always the loud, obvious ones. Sometimes they are made quietly, in a grand hall, in front of a crowd, in the space of a single sentence spoken to someone who was simply too plain, too quiet, and too without rank for a proud man to see clearly. Serafina took her seat on the Royal Council 3 months later, the first Luna Primalis in recorded history to be formally recognized and given a place at the kingdom's table. She was not loud about it. She did not celebrate publicly. She sat down, listened carefully, and began her work. One afternoon, an old council member asked her the question that everyone in the room had been thinking since the day she arrived. Did she hold any bitterness toward Alpha Kaelin Dusk? She was quiet for a moment. She had learned, in the old forest and in the long months since, that honest answers are almost always the quietest ones. "He rejected me because he saw nothing in me," she said at last. "I don't blame him for that. Most people only see what they have been taught to look for." She paused. "I feel sorry for him, actually. He was standing next to something rare, something the world only produces once every few centuries, and all he could see was a plain girl with no last name." She looked out the tall window at the full moon rising over the kingdom, steady and silver and indifferent to the opinions of anyone below it. "That is not cruelty," she said softly. "That is just a very expensive kind of blindness." Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Then the oldest member of the council, a woman who had served for 30 years and had seen many things, folded her hands on the table and nodded once. And the meeting continued.